from which my party, the New Democratic Party, the New Patriotic Party, has emerged, were the same people who gathered in Salt Pond on that seminal date of 4th August to initiate the struggle for freedom and national independence. They believed at the outset of the Cold War that the principles of democratic accountability, respect for the rule of law and human rights, individual liberty and responsibility, and a strong market economy with good management of public finances would provide the most effective base for African development. The motto of our party became, and I quote, development in freedom, and unquote. And I believe these words have come to have a far deeper meaning across our continent. By the 1960s, all of the North African states had gained independence, and by 1966, with Ghana in the lead, all but 6 sub-Saharan African countries had as well. That same year, there were 8 military coups in Africa, including one that overthrew Ghana's first president, the world-famous Kwame Nkrumah. 3 straight decades of decline did not tell a bright story of the short history of independent Africa. The 1980s saw only 5 African countries holding competitive elections. Dictatorship and suppression of individual freedoms were apologized for as a necessary trade-off for development, despite the era of authoritarian rule being Africa's worst period of economic decline, instability, and insecurity. But Africa was quick to learn from global trends. In 1970, the number of electoral democracies globally was about 45. This has now increased threefold, and Africa alone is responsible for 1/3 of this increase. I believe this same innate capacity must be translated into the most important African project of the 21st century, the social and economic transformation of the continent. African leaders must help build societies of opportunities that meet the aspirations of our 1 billion people. The dearth of inclusiveness and opportunities for the youth will sink African democracy unless we can end, quote, jobless growth driven by extractive industries and raw material exports. The urgent task ahead is captured in the words of Mutuli Ncube, Chief Economist and Vice President of the African Development Bank. And I quote, Africa is growing, but there are risks. Urgent attention is needed to foster inclusive growth, to improve political accountability, and to address the youth bulge, unquote. As one writer put it, the revolutions in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya were not created by accident, but the direct consequence of deep social transformations that, hopefully, are irreversible. The transformation is led by the youth population, who have grown up believing that freedom can lead to greater prosperity. Mohamed Bouazizi, the young man who set himself alight and triggered the Arab Spring, did so because the Tunisian system had long failed to give him and his generation the freedom and opportunity to pursue the prosperity that they desired. Autocracy placed an unsustainable check on the spread of opportunities. The angst and frustration that propelled the protests in the Arab world, in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, in Syria and Yemen, resonate deeply with many Africans. It is a shared sense of arrested opportunities. The young, hungry generation, with a global perspective on opportunities and the aspirations to match, expect their leaders to help deliver social and economic transformation that will have a meaningful impact on their lives. And they have new tools to achieve their goals, with the continent having the second largest number of mobile phone users in the world. The political space in most of sub-Saharan Africa has been opening up, especially since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was only a matter of time before it crossed the Sahara. The Sahara has always been seen as a dividing line on our continent between religions, ethnicities, ideologies, cultures. But I believe that these distinctions will finally break down over the 21st century as Arab nations persevere to come to terms with the same choices other African nations have been making for the last 2 decades. It is time that the North-South divide in Africa forever becomes just sand and not a mental divide. Sub-Saharan Africa has valuable lessons learned to offer North Africa and vice versa. The challenge for the whole of Africa in the 21st century is to use the space of democracy to facilitate social and economic transformation. Providing economic opportunity for our people is our most critical task. Despite different starting points, we face similar challenges to transform our economies, and nearly half of the expected global population growth over the next 4 decades will happen in Africa. This is a daunting statistic that should nevertheless excite African leaders to rise to the challenge. It should motivate us to be bold in investing in education and in training. The Arab Spring has reminded us that democracy will rise because it has the capacity to respond to the innate human instincts for freedom and for the ability to determine the direction of people's own lives. Progress across North Africa is still uneven, with some very new governments and some very old ones looking for answers to satisfy their people. In sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana's example as a stable democracy with a vibrant economy has pulled the region along, and we believe this same catalytic effect can happen in the north. The power of seeing firsthand the dividends of democracy cannot be overrated. But whether in Europe or Africa, Asia or the Americas, democracy must find its own course. The current new wave of democracy in the Arab world will no doubt add its own rich contribution to our understanding of democracies, and we should be patient as this quest to define a new identity plays out. But I think it is important for us all to remember that Islam is no more incompatible with democracy than African values were supposed to be. Democracy will be successful where it enjoys domestic ownership and leadership that is responsive to the people. Alfred Stepan and Graham Robertson compared 16 Muslim-majority countries that are predominantly Arab with 29 other Muslim-majority countries and documented that the democracy deficit that Arab societies face is Arab much more than it is Muslim. Non-Arab states have shown success in offering reasonably inclusive and democratic political rights to their citizens. So I am not on the side of those who fear that the Arab Spring will end by empowering fundamentalists through elections. Indeed, many Arab leaders use the pervasive fear of radical Islam as the alternative waiting just off stage as the excuse to bait the rest of the world to continue to support their authoritarian tendencies. I believe we would all be better served by helping Islamic political parties learn that they must deliver or face tough elections rather than telling them there is some characteristic in their ideology that will prevent them from succeeding. African governments, post-Soviet ones, and Latin American ones all went through this same learning curve. In fact, It was only recently